First of all, just like to thank Sheikh Saleh and the brothers from the masjid for inviting me on this very auspicious time of the last 10 days of Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from all of us and especially from those of you in i'tikaf and give us make the last 10 days of freedom from the hellfire. Ameen. So inshallah, I think it will be probably 8 sessions. I think it will work out, or 8 or 9 sessions that we have. Inshallah, we're going to be looking at the broad sweep of history, starting from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the beginning of Islam, and all the way up to the 20th century and to our time. So, obviously, when you're doing such a sort of a broad history, we're not going to be going into nitty-gritty details of things. And there'll probably be a lot of things that, even important things that we're not going to cover, but the idea is to give people an overview, a good picture. There's a saying in English, to see the forest from the trees. Yeah? To see the forest from the trees. I'm sure you guys understand the meaning of that. Yeah? But people often forget, because especially the way academia nowadays is geared up, is people become obsessed about studying very small niche aspects of things, to get your PhD or to become a professor, you know everything about one tiny, the letters that Winston Churchill wrote to his mistress or something, you spend 5 years studying those. Or you spend your whole life on these little aspects. But then often people can lose the forest, the picture. And I think because for us, knowledge is not about, getting a degree or having a job in a university. For us, knowledge is about understanding reality. Yeah. For us, knowledge is a sacred thing. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, only those who have knowledge truly fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Like, so knowledge is linked to fear of Allah. In other words, knowledge is linked to taqwa. So for us as Muslims, knowledge is a completely different thing, So when we study history, we want to learn. We want to get some lessons. Why do we study history? Is it even important? Well, one of the reasons why it's so important is because if you look at the Quran, which is our guidebook to our life and the guidebook to reality, the Quran is a lot of information and knowledge about history, about things that happened in the past. So Alama Muhammad Iqbal, rahimahullah, one of our great scholars from Indian subcontinent, he said that knowledge, if you look at the Quran, there's 3 sources of knowledge that Allah tells us from the Quran. One of them is the knowledge of yourself, the psychology. One of them is to look at nature, so in other words, the sciences, physical sciences. And the third one is history. So history is there, it's in the Quran for a reason. It's not there just to tell us nice stories, make us feel good. Yeah, they're there for a very important reason. Primarily so we can learn. We can learn, first of all, what are the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How does Allah... Because throughout history, there are certain patterns, which we call sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You will not find any change in the sunnah of Allah. There's not just a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. There's also a sunnah of Allah, which is mentioned in the Quran. لَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You will not find from the sunnah of Allah any change. In other words, the sunnah of Allah, there's certain historical laws. There's certain social laws that govern history. And these laws can never be changed. The Quran says that. You will not find any change in the sunnah of Allah. What Allah has established, that will happen. Just like you have the laws of physics, you have laws of history as well. So anyway, that's the importance of studying history. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Um, Anyone doing a history degree or anything? Anyone? History A levels, history degree? No, okay. So just to give me an idea, yeah. History degree or A level? A level. Mashallah. Okay. So this on the screen. Hope everyone can read that. Okay, is the basic outline of what we're going to be looking at. So yeah, the idea is to get us the forest. To give us the big picture, and then we can spend the rest of our lives studying the details. Um, and people do spend their whole lives, studying just any aspect of the history. But we want to get the outline. What happened from the beginning of Islam until today? What's happened? A lot of us know what happened in the Seerah. Yeah, many of us study the Seerah in our madrasas and things. Some of us may know a bit about Khulafa Rashidun. The first four Khalifas. That's often studied sometimes in the madrasas and everything. If you went to a good madrasa. But many of us have got a big blank then from that part time. Yeah, there's 1400 years ago until today. What happened in the Muslim world? What happened to the Muslims as a civilization? How did we end up where we are now? Have we always been like this? What's going on? It's very important. If we don't know what happened, where we came from, we will never know how to move forward from here. Yeah? And one of the things the enemies of Islam always try to do is to divorce us from our history. Yeah? They will divorce us from our history because they understand the importance of history. Western civilization, they wrote their history in the 19th century. And it goes on till now. But what was done in the 19th century still is affecting the teaching of history till today. And like for example, when they invaded Baghdad, invaded Iraq, one of the mysterious things that was happening that people didn't understand was that the museums, libraries, they were all getting torched. They were literally getting burnt down. And there was very few journalists on the ground, but there was one a very brave journalist from Britain, Robert Fisk. Some of you may have heard of him. He used to write for the Guardian and the Independent. I think he passed. I'm not sure if he passed away, but anyway, Robert Fisk is. He was there on the ground in Iraq, in the middle of all this invasion. And the poor man, he was reporting what was the bad things that were happening, but he got himself attacked a few times from Muslims. They're thinking he's an American or something. But anyway, he said what he observed one of these museums or libraries being burnt down, and he said the strange thing was the people who did it, they weren't just like rioting or people. It was some people that came in some vehicles from outside of Iraq. They drove in specifically targeting this place, straight to that place, burnt the place down, and drove out. So it wasn't like some random, like the media was portraying these random, there's rioting and looting and all this stuff. It seemed to be very targeted. So they want to divorce us from our history for a reason. And if you read, say, a book on world history, textbook on world history in English language, you'll see that the space that is given to Islam is very, very small. I've looked at quite a few of these textbooks over my time since I've been developing this course for 10 years now and teaching it. And literally, you'll have a book on world history, say 200, 300 pages, and the history of Islam will be 4 pages or 2 pages. And they will fragment the history of Islam. So that history of Islam is just that 2 pages where it's about the Arabs, right? And then separate, they will have history of the Mongols, and then they'll have history of the Mughals, or they might have history of the Turks, right? And they don't make the link that actually this is one history. This is the history of the Muslims. This is the history of Islamic civilization. A unified history that spans over 1,000 years. So this is the type of fragmentation and so they'll break it up: Arabs, Turks, Mongols, and all these different things. So one of the things, inshallah, we're going to try to fix that. So this chart, If you forget everything else, if you at the end of this course, if you just remember this one chart, which is like a summary of the history of the world from about 600 when the Prophet ﷺ comes. Yeah, the Prophet ﷺ is born in 570. Yeah, and until year 2000, so until now, this is a broad sweep of the history. Now, this at the same time, if you look at the Western system of division of history, you've probably heard of ancient period, medieval or Middle Ages, and then you come into the modern. Yeah. So if you look at the Western, the way it's divided in Western textbooks, it's ancient, Middle Ages or medieval period, and then the modern period. And before the modern period, you normally have a early modern. The modern is divided early modern and then modern. So where does this link up to that? We're going to see in the next slide. Yeah. But generally speaking, if you look here, the Islamic age, and this is my terminology because you won't find this in any Western history textbook, Islamic age or Islamic millennium, because the Islamic age spanned over 1,000 years. Yeah, approximately 1,000 years from the first, the Khulafa Rashidun period, when under Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, the Islamic Caliphate became the largest power, the greatest power in the world of its time, under Sayyidina Umar. From that time, for over 1,000 years, the Muslims remained the dominant world power. Like, nowadays you have, who's the superpower now? If I ask you, who's the superpower today? I'm sure all of you can tell me, yeah? Don't say Britain. Yeah? America, right? The Muslims were the superpower of their time for over 1,000 years. There was no one that could challenge Muslim superiority militarily, economically, culturally, in learning, all of these things. Right? So this takes us right up until about 1700. Right? So we can say the Islamic age all the way up until about 700. Yeah, so just very roughly 700 to 1700, 1,000 years. And I put the end of the Islamic age as 1707 only because it's symbolic. Obviously, nothing happened in 1707 that suddenly everything happens gradually, but as a symbolic end to the Islamic age is 1707. The reason why I chose that particular year is the death of Aurangzeb, the greatest of the Mughal emperors in India, and it marks the beginning of the decline of Mughal India and symbolically the decline of the Muslim world. Because India is one of the largest, and most significant areas of the Muslim world. And it also marks the year where the unification of England and Scotland take place to form Great Britain, which is significant. At the time, it was not that significant, but historically, Great Britain becomes a very, very significant player because by the 19th century, Great Britain has become the superpower of the world. Yeah, and it's only after World War I and World War II that America take the place of Britain as the world superpower. And until that time, it was a British Empire. Yeah? And don't forget, the America is actually part of the British Empire. It's a break-off from the British Empire. The Americans are essentially they're British, descendants of British people. And it was the western part of the British Empire that broke away and declared independence. Anyway, so that's the Islamic age, right? Up until 1707. Keep an eye on the time as well, inshallah. And so from around about 1700 till now, really, is what we can call the European age. And some Western historians do call it the European age. So this is a time where Western Europe, and when we say Western Europe and European age, we include America, because America, they're just the descendants of Europeans, primarily British, as I said. So the European age starts around 1700, and we're now still living in that time period, which we can call the European age, where Western civilization is the dominant civilization in the world, and militarily, economically, and etc., etc. So then, just to skip on to the next slide, which shows the same type of timeline, but in a slightly different format. Yeah. Once again, I hope you can read that okay. So once again, the same thing we have in green. In green, you have the Islamic age, yeah? The green arrows. So all of that three period. The Islamic age we divide into three main periods. And this is done roughly based on the division developed by a famous historian called Marshall Hodgson, who's considered one of the leading historians of Islam in the West, in Western academia. He passed away now, but his main work, The Venture of Islam, is still considered to be one of the leading texts in the subject, even though it's a little bit outdated. It's really unparalleled work, The Venture of Islam. So Marshall Hodgson divides it into these three different periods of Islamic history. The High Caliphate period, which is the first approximately 400 years, which is basically when the Muslim world is united under one caliphate, pretty much. It starts breaking up slowly, but pretty much you can say it's there's one caliph, or khalifa as we call it, and so you start with the Rashidun, and then the Umayyads, and then the Abbasids are the big one, yeah, the Abbasids. Yeah, so that's the High Caliphate period. Now Marshall Hodgson himself calls it the High Caliphal period. So I've slightly changed the terminology to Caliphate, because it just Caliphal is just a little bit obscure. So High Caliphate period. And then he has then a very long period called the Middle period, which he calls the Middle period. And this is an age where the United Caliphate is now split up into many small different Muslim emirates, sultanates, and khanates. And they're called emirate, sultanate, khanate, depending on what is the leader. So if you have an emir, then it's an emirate. Like you have United Arab Emirates nowadays, yeah? Because they have an emir. If you have a sultan, we call it a sultanate. And if you have a khan, which was a bit later, so the latter part of the middle period, we start having the khans. The leader of the Muslims are called khan because of the Mongol invasions. Yeah, the Mongols come out in the middle of the middle period here, around about 1200, under Genghis Khan, but then they soon convert to Islam. So that's why even till today, many people who have the surname Khan, I won't tell you to put your hands up, but I'm sure at least half of you must be Khan, right? That's back from the great period of the Khanates, yeah, where the leaders of the Muslim were called Khans. Yeah, then the third period is a smaller one, 200 years, which Marshall Hodgson calls the gunpowder period. And this is named so because during this time, obviously, gunpowder weapons come about for the first time, and they revolutionize the face of the world, really, in terms of military and so on. But during this period, you have three great empires. So you go from a united caliphate in the beginning to the middle period where there's many different disintegrated Muslim polities. At times you do have quite larger empires as well, but it fluctuates a lot. And then the gunpowder period, you go back to a type of united large empires. So you have the Mughals, the Safavids, and the Ottomans, the three great empires in the Muslim world during this period. And they between them, they cover most of the Muslim world, not all, but they cover a large part of the Muslim world between these three great empires. So that's sort of a breakdown of the Islamic age into three major periods, and then you go into the European age. And here, what I've done here is I've added the Western classification of history here, because this is probably what you're more aware of, like if you've studied A-level history and things like that, yeah, or even if you've done GCSE history in school, yeah, you'll know about Middle Ages, early modern period, and modern period here. So you can see how it corresponds. Basically, up to about here, so if you take the High Caliphate period, is basically the early Middle Ages, or what also known as the Dark Ages in Europe. Yeah, that's the High Caliphate period. And then the middle period is correspond to the High Middle Ages in the Western system. That's the time of when you have these castles and you have these armored knights and all of these things, yeah, the High Middle Ages. And then the gunpowder period corresponds roughly to the early modern period in Europe. And then from about 1800, you have what's called the modern period, where you start getting industrialization and all of these scientific developments and so on. Okay, so inshallah, if you one thing you can do is memorize this timeline, that will be an amazing thing, to have that overview of things. Okay, now we're going to look at what the world looked like at the beginning of Islam. What did the world look like when the Prophet ﷺ was born, or when he started preaching Islam? This is a sort of a map of the world. When I say world, obviously I mean the Afro-Eurasian world, or Africa, Asia, and Europe. So there's obviously North and South America, which is separate continents, but they're not really affected by the history during this period because they're quite separated, and they only come into the picture when we start going into the colonial period, where Europeans start colonizing the Americas. Yeah. Um, so for many thousands of years, the Americas are separate from what we call the Afro-Eurasian world, Africa, Asia, and Europe. As you can see here on the map, Africa, Asia, and Europe, they're very closely connected. Yeah, these three continents, as they're called. Although in fact, there's no reason to call Europe a continent. It's not really a continent, but it's just once again their pride and arrogance in the 19th century when they started ruling over the world. They start calling Europe a continent. How is Europe a continent? If you look at the map, it's not a continent. It's just maybe a subcontinent, yeah? Like you have India here, subcontinent of Asia. But anyway, Africa, Europe, and Asia are very closely related here. And the Mediterranean Sea here, you can see the Mediterranean where I've put the pointer. The Mediterranean Sea is a very key strategic sea because it links Europe, Africa, and Asia. Yeah? So you've got Europe on the north, Africa, and Egypt here is a very important. Egypt is a breadbasket of the world, yeah, one of the most fertile places in the world. And you have then Asia, or what we call here the Middle East and Turkey, right? So the Mediterranean is a center of a lot of commerce and trade movement. Because remember, one of the things when we study history, one of the things, the importance of seas and oceans. Because remember, most trade, even till today, happens by ocean or sea. Because on ships, you can carry much more than you can carry on aeroplanes or trains even. Yeah? Ships, you can carry massive cargo. So even till today, must be more than 90% of the world trade happens through ships, yeah? When you're trying to transport large amount of goods. So whoever controls the Mediterranean, for example, is going to be controlling a huge amount of trade, going from Asia into Europe to Africa. All of that is going to be crossing the Mediterranean. So anyway, at the beginning of Islam, we see obviously here we see Arabia, and You have two great superpowers at that time. In red, you have the Eastern Roman Empire, yeah, which is in red, and in the pink, you have the Persian Empire. And in the middle, you've got Arabia here. You see, so Arabia to the north, you have the Romans, and to the east, you have the Persians. Uh, and So these are the two great empires or two great superpowers of their time. And if you go further east, you have India, and India also has a very advanced civilization at that time, uh, which we one of the things often is not really highlighted as well. The ancient Indian civilization is one of the most advanced of all civilizations, but they're very contained mainly because of the Himalayas, the Himalaya mountains. India, the Indians, they're basically Indians. People don't really invade because of those mountains, and they don't leave. So the Indian civilization is very advanced. How do we know that? There's many indications for that. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, in one of the verse of poetry, one of the poets, he was praising the Prophet ﷺ, and he described him as a Sayf al Muhannada, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is an Indian sword. He's an Indian sword, a Sayf al Muhannada, indicating to us that the Indian swords were the best swords in the world. Yeah, because when you praise someone and you compare them to an Indian sword, so the Indian civilization was very advanced for its time. And then further east as well, then you have the Chinese, and the Chinese are an advanced civilization as well. And once again, but they're also quite contained. They've built the Great Wall. They're not really interested in taking over. They're happy being within their Great Wall and everything. And they've got the mountains between them and the Indians. So these are the sort of advanced civilizations of the time: the Romans, the Persians, the Indians, and the Chinese. And then you have other areas which are sort of nomadic type of areas, and these are not advanced civilizations. These are what the Romans called barbarians. Yeah, the Romans called these people barbarians. They're people that don't have sort of law and order. They don't have writing and reading and civilization. They don't have advanced culture, architecture, arts, and these things. So the word barbarian comes from the Roman, from Rome, from Latin. So these are the people that lived around these advanced civilizations. So, for example, in Arabia, at that time, you had the Arabs, the Bedouins. Yeah. So these are tribal people. They roam around. A lot of them are nomadic. Some of them are settled in small towns, but a lot of them are roaming around the deserts. Right. Similarly, in the Sahara Desert here, you have nomads. Yeah. Even till today, you have some. And then also to the north here, you see where I put Great Eurasian Steppes. The Great Eurasian Steppe is a vast area of sort of arid, dry land, but flat land, which stretches all the way into Eastern Europe and all the way east to Mongolia. Yeah, the Great Eurasian Steppe. And in this region, you always have these nomadic people as well. Like at that time, they were mainly Turkic tribes. Yeah, Turkic tribes. And these are similar to the Arab Bedouins there, but Arab Bedouins, they mainly have camels and sheep. The steppe people here, they mainly have horses and sheep. Right? So camels are not a big thing for them, but horses are a big thing for them. And we're going to talk about that a bit more because these type of people are very important to the history that we're going to be talking about. Um, so this is just a picture of of, you can see here the Roman Emperor Heraclius, and that's the Persian Emperor Kisra, or known in English as Khosrows. And Heraclius has got his head, and because Heraclius defeated him eventually. Now this event happened after the Prophet ﷺ sent the letters. So you remember towards the end of his life, the Prophet ﷺ, when all of Arabia had become united under him, he then sent the dawah out to surrounding lands. So he sent letters of inviting them to Islam, to the great rulers around Arabia. And so he sent one to Heraclius, the emperor of Rome, and he sent one to Kisra, or Khosrows. And if you're probably aware, you're probably familiar with the story, when Heraclius received the letter, he treated it with some degree of respect. Because Heraclius was a Christian, and the Christians knew that the final prophet is about to come. So Heraclius was actually, thinking this could be him. But Kisra, the Persian emperor, he treated the letter with a lot of disrespect. And the messengers as well, the Arabs that had come to bring the thing, he just regarded them as, these Bedouins, why they're coming out of the desert. And he ripped up the paper and threw it away. And when the Prophet ﷺ was told about that, he said, may Allah rip up his kingdom, And so soon after that, then the Khosrows himself was basically defeated by the Romans, because the Romans and Persians were always fighting. For centuries they had been fighting. But then Allah gave victory to the Eastern Romans, and Khosrows himself was killed by Heraclius. So this is something just for the last 10-15 minutes we've got left of this portion. Really understand what what I was showing on the map, between you have the advanced civilizations, and then you have these people that are called barbarians by the Romans. Now, some people may object to you calling these people barbarians, right? And people do object, but because obviously barbarian is quite a loaded term, and do we want to call them barbarians? But I personally like the term, right? Because I think it just adds a bit of spice to the history, and we don't want to be bored, sitting around with very neutral terms. So let's be a bit exciting. Call them barbarians. But let's think, what do we mean by barbarians? Let's define the term, So if on the one side we're saying we've got civilized society, so the Romans, the Persians, the Chinese, the Indian, they're civilized. What do we mean by civilized? And what do we mean by these Arabs and these other Turkic tribes being barbarians? So this is the table, some of the main features of each. One of them is the rule of law. So in a civilized, in those days there were empires, but let's say civilized society, you have the rule of law. You have judges. Whether it's implemented or not is a different thing, but you should have sort of laws that everyone has to abide by. And if something is done wrong, you can go to a judge or a court and things like that. So that's one thing. These barbarian people, they don't have that type of system. So if you look at the Arabs before Islam, the Bedouins, they have tribes. There's no court system, there's no qadi. Islam is the one that brings civilization to these people. Right? They just, they're tribal people. That's why, even till today, one of the last tribal places left in the world, according to anthropologists, is, anyone know where? The Pashtuns, east, northwest, and Afghanistan, is one of the last true tribal places. So even today, they describe them as a law, it's ungovernable. There's no law and order there. But they do have a tribal code. These people, they have their own sort of tribal code, which they live by. And they're very fanatic on that as well. And we're going to come back to that. They have to be, because it's about survival. The other thing, just to point out between these two different people, is that the other thing about the barbarians is they live in extreme circumstances. They live in very harsh environments. That's why, the land that they live on is not conducive to farming. It's either desert or it's steppe. What we call steppe is a very dry type of grassland. So you can't grow agriculture, you can't farm. So the key to having civilization is farming, because then you have settled communities, right? And when you have farming and settled communities, the thing with farming is you produce more than you need. Yeah. So then you can have small towns and cities growing up, because the people in towns and cities, they don't grow their own food. And they get it from the surrounding farmlands. So one of the things with the civilized regions, this is why if you look at those, where we looked at the Romans, the Persians, they're very fertile. They're around fertile lands. They're normally around rivers. Yeah. So the Persia, you've got the two great rivers, Tigris and the Euphrates, in Iraq. India is the Punjab, the five rivers. You got many rivers there. China as well, rivers. So you need to have farming to have a settled community. So these barbarians, they live in like deserts, Sahara Desert, Arabian Desert, the Eurasian steppe, where they have to move around because they just the nature of their environment. So these people, they live close to starvation, basically. They live on the edge of existence normally. So that's also why physically they're very tough. Yeah. So physically, these people are very, very. They've been described as super warriors. In fact, that's probably me describing them as that, but you can think of them as super warriors. And this is why the civilizations are always fearing them. Yeah, the Romans, the Persians. We'll see later, even with the Islamic empires, there's always a threat from these barbarian or tribal people, because they're also desperate as well, for food and things like that. If they're going through a hard time, they will start encroaching onto those settled people and raiding them and trying to. So they're always a threat to these empires. Um, the other thing is literacy is one of the major. So the civilized people are normally, they have reading, writing. So they then develop a sort of advanced, knowledge, culture, this type of thing. These people, they're illiterate. So even the Quran describes the Arabs as ummiyin. Yeah, and Nabiyul Ummi, and he's sent to the ummiyin. He's sent to the illiterate people. Yeah? So it's a common feature of these type of barbarian people that they don't have reading and writing. They don't have that type of advanced. And once again, what did Islam do? It brings them reading and writing. It's literally civilizing these Arab Bedouins. Yeah, the Quran says Iqra. The first word is Iqra, but the Prophet ﷺ himself, he can't read. But Allah saying read. And then we know the Prophet ﷺ, how much importance he gave to learning, the Muslims learning to read and write. So you're literally civilizing these people with this new deen. We mentioned about agriculture and settled communities, and obviously the tribal. Yeah, so these barbarian people tend to be tribally, because this is how they survive. Once again, once you're in a settled civilization, you're not that concerned about your tribe, because now you're a citizen, you have a law and order. Like, a lot of us have been in England now you're not that concerned about your wider tribe now anymore, yeah? You're probably becoming like English people now. You don't even meet your second cousins anymore, and even your own brothers and sisters, you probably just see them on Eid or something, yeah? That's because we've got sort of stability, law and order. If you're living in the desert, you need your tribe, you need your clan. It's all about survival. And one of the things that I have noticed is that, and once again, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone has written about this. It could be a good PhD project or a good article. Is that if you look at the tribal code, across these different people, it's very, very similar wherever you go. It's very, very similar. If you look at the Arabs, before Islam, their tribal code is well known from the Seerah. If you look at the Turkic tribes from the Eurasian steppe, a thousand of miles away. And even if you look at the Pashtun code today, they still have that. Pashtun Wali. Some of you may be familiar with. I won't embarrass you by putting your hands up, yeah? It's very similar. And if you look at the tribal code, it's all to do with survival, I think. Nearly everything within that thing comes back to survival. For example, the Arabs had this as well, yeah? The concept of asylum. Like if you come to a tribe or, and someone gives you asylum, the whole tribe has to protect you. You're protected. Because remember, these people are living without law and order. There's a lot of raiding and fighting going on between these tribes. Yeah? In fact, this is another feature of them. They're always raiding one another. And that's, in a way, it's part of their way of living. It's not considered a bad thing for them. It's part of their way of life. And they all accept that, So if you can get a few of your guys together from your tribe, sneak into the other tribe and quickly rush with your swords and grab their sheep and run back to your tribe with 100 sheep, that's a raid, Then now it's become your sheep, it's fine. If you want to do a particularly big raid, you might even grab some of their women and children and take them as slaves. And sometimes then that tribe will pay you money to get them freed. So this is part of their culture, but once again, because they're on the edge of survival, they need to steal those sheep from the other tribes. So raiding is part of, and this is partly also what makes them very tough. Not just the environment they're growing up in, but because they're always in a sort of they used to say, like Winston Churchill, he said, if you look at the Pashtuns, the northwest frontier, all of them carry guns. It's part of the culture, the constant vendettas, fighting. So it's called Pashtun Wali, apparently. So I can't read that myself, but maybe the last true mountain. Yeah, the other place where you find this tribal type of people is also in mountains. So in the deserts and the steppe, you have sort of more nomadic. They move around, but also in mountainous areas, they call them semi-nomadic sometimes. So they're not nomads. They don't travel around the desert, but for example, in the summer, they might go up in the mountain, and in the winter they come down to find grazing. So they're semi-nomadic. But mountainous people often have this same type of tribal characteristics. Yeah. So what we find with this type of tribal code, it's all based around survival. So why do they have such for example, revenge? If you kill anyone from my tribe, we're going to get revenge. We have to get revenge. And sometimes then the blood feud will go on for generations. Yeah? Remember the Aus and the Khazraj. Before the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, one of the things, the Aus and the Khazraj, the two Arab tribes in Medina, they had been killing each other for generations. There was a blood vendetta. They were killing each other for generations based on some small incident that happened many long time ago. People can't even remember what happened. But now once the blood feud starts, it can't stop. And once again, it's to do with survival. Because if you know that this person's tribe is going to take revenge for him, you're going to think twice before you do anything to that person. And if that person's lost in the desert wandering around by himself, and you find him, you're from another tribe, are you going to kill him and take all his stuff? But if he's from a powerful tribe, you're going to think twice. Even though he's vulnerable there, you know, according to the tribal code, someone's going to come after you. Right? So it's all about survival. Asylum. If you're a wandering Bedouin lost in the desert, you're about to die of starvation or thirst, and you see a camp of another tribe, they have to give you hospitality. It's a rule. It's a law. Tribal code. Even till today, that's why the Taliban didn't hand over Osama bin Laden. Bad example. Or a good, I don't know, it's a good example. Yeah? Because once you're a guest of these people, they're duty bound that you have to be protected no matter what happens. Actually, they did offer to hand him over to a Muslim country. They just refused to hand him over to the Americans. Okay, so that's a sort of a background. Yeah, this is very important when we look at the history, because the interplay between the barbarian and the settled peoples is the key to understanding a lot of the historical processes and events that take place throughout the um, Islamic period, and even in the ancient times. It's very important. One of the first people to pick up this pattern was Ibn Khaldun, one of our great historians. Ibn Khaldun wrote about this pattern of these sort of Bedouin peoples and how they, their type of characteristics and how they take over the settled people. Because the settled people, they start becoming soft, because of their luxurious lifestyle. Even though they try to maintain a very strong armies, like the Romans, for example. Yeah, they have, obviously, about the Roman legions, the gladiators. They have intense training for their soldiers, but they still can't match these when these Turkic tribes come in from the steppe, or the Arab Bedouins come. They can't match them because of they're literally, growing up in that environment from a child. Is different to training someone as a soldier. Also, I mean, Ibn Khaldun was the first one to see this pattern or talk about this pattern of where you have sort of civilized or settled communities, and then you have these invasions by the barbarians, because they're super tough. So they tend to come and take over, but then after a few generations, they start becoming soft as well, yeah, because they're living that luxury. And then you have the next wave coming in from the desert or the steppe and so on. And if you look at history, you can see this pattern repeatedly. I mean, the Chinese were very aware of this problem from the barbarians from the north. Yeah, that's why they built the Great Wall of China to keep out the barbarians from the north, because they had continuous problems of them coming down from what we call today Mongolia, yeah, and Central Asia. These are the sort of steppe lands. So the Chinese developed all sorts of different policies to try to control this threat of the invasions from the north, yeah, from these nomadic people. The Chinese would send spies and agents, and they would try to make sure to keep the tribes fighting each other. So they deliberately did that. Make sure they never unite or get together, because if they get together, then they're going to become a big threat to the Chinese. So, like today, you have CIA going around causing fighting between people and all that. It's an old story. Yeah? The Chinese were doing that with the northern barbarians. Make sure they keep, because like we said, these people tend to fight each other mostly, and they spend all their energy killing and fighting each other. But if they do become united, then they can become very, very powerful force. So that was one of the things the Chinese did. Secondly, you try to incorporate them. So the tribes that come close to your borders, you try to bring them into your army. So you pay them. Why don't you just come and join our army, and you get a good salary. You'll have your food and drink. A lot of them that worked as well. Romans did the same with the barbarians surrounding the Roman Empire. Yeah. Bring them in as mercenaries, paid mercenary groups. Sorry.
So I had a question.
Yeah.
On your map,
Yeah.
you had the Roman Empire, but it didn't go into Italy.
Yeah, Eastern Roman Empire by this time. So at this time, when Islam comes, the Western Roman Empire has disintegrated. And interestingly, why did the Western Roman Empire disintegrate? It was barbarian invasions. Yeah, the barbarians. So that's why Italy is no longer part of the Roman Empire at that time. So Uh, so the different policies. So the Romans, the Chinese. The other thing is you create buffer zones. Yeah. So we see this with the Arabs. If you remember when the Prophet ﷺ came to the north, you had the sort of the Arabs that were allied to the Roman Empire, and to the east you had the Arab tribes that were allied to the Persians. So the Persians and the Romans have created these buffer zones of Arab tribes that are basically under their payroll. Yeah. And in return they get certain perks like you're the king of the Arabs or something, whatever it is. Yeah. And so you have the Banu Ghassan and the Banu Lakham. Yeah, the Roman client. You could call them Roman clients. So they're Arab tribes. So they're different policies that these empires develop to control these barbarians because they're quite dangerous to their they don't want them raiding and stuff like that into their territories. Um, and the final thing the Chinese recognized is even worse comes to worse. If they do, if a large group of them manage to invade into China, and even if they take over, what we do is we assimilate them. Yeah. So we basically make them Chinese. And this is one of the features we see again and again with the barbarians, because they're invading people that are of a higher culture. They tend to lose their culture and assimilate into the higher culture. So these, for example, and I'm going to give a couple of examples actually here. If you look at we're going to look at three examples of this here. One of them is the Mongolian invasions, and the second one is the Vikings, and the third one is the Arabs, which are the Muslims. Yeah. So in each of these cases, we have these barbarian people coming out and invading large parts of civilized world around them and taking over, conquering those lands. Yeah. So in the case of the Mongols, they became united under Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan managed to unite the Mongolian tribes under one leader. And so remember, when they unite, they become very powerful. When they're fighting each other, no one cares because they're just occupying them. But he united them all under one leader, Genghis Khan. And so then they erupted and they took over a large part of Asia. And this was the extent of the Mongolian empires. Yeah. This is after Genghis Khan, when the empire split up into 5 different parts. So you can see, if you look at the empire, it's taken over most of Asia and gone right into Eastern Europe as well. So they were literally in Hungary, right in Eastern Europe. Remember the steppe, the Eurasian steppe, stretches all the way across here. So the countries today, which we call Central Asia countries, yeah, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, etc. These are all parts of what we call in the Eurasian steppe lands. Yeah. So when the empire split up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different empires, yeah. On the east, you had the invasion of the Chinese. And all of these lands, mainly they were Muslim lands that were invaded by the Mongols. Yeah? And some parts of Christian here in Eastern Europe and Russia. But the vast majority of the lands that were invaded by the Mongols were Muslim lands, and also the Chinese. They took over the entirety of the Chinese empire. Now, but what happened to the Mongols after they invaded all of these lands? Within about 2-3 generations, the Mongols that had invaded China, they had all become Chinese. What do I mean by that? They stopped speaking Mongolian, they start speaking Chinese. They stop following the Mongolian religion. They start following Chinese religion and philosophy. They stop their names, their dress, everything becomes the culture basically becomes Chinese. And why is that? Is because barbarian people, remember we said they're illiterate. They're kind of backward people, if I want to use that phrase, yeah? They're kind of like if you go back to your village in Pakistan and someone who has, who's never studied anything or doesn't know much. They also normally have a very primitive, what we call a primitive religion. Yeah. So for those people who watch Ertugrul and Osman, you see the Mongols in there, right? They got the Mongols. Now this is before they became Muslim. Obviously later they became Muslim, but they have this type of what we call a paganistic religion, in which they basically they have a lot of shirk, but they also worship a lot of things like nature and trees and all these different type of things. Shamanistic religion. They always have shamans as well, so they have these sort of people that get possessed by spirits and things like that. So it's a very primitive type of culture. So when they come across the higher culture of the Chinese, soon they lose their own culture and they become Chinese. And so the Mongols that came into the Muslim world here, all of these Ilkhanate and Golden Horde and all these things, they all became Muslim. They lost their language, they get the Arabic language. Where you go in the world, is there anyone speaking Mongolian in all these places? No, they're speaking Chinese or they're speaking Arabic or Persian. They take the religion, because the monotheistic religion is an more advanced than that sort of paganistic, primitive religion. So this is always the pattern whenever we see these type of sort of barbarian invasions. So the Mongols in the east, they become in the west, in the east they become Chinese, and the west they become Muslim. So this is what we call assimilation. So the Chinese recognize this. So they say, in worst case scenario, where our civilization will survive even if these guys invade us. And so if we look at the Vikings as another example, the Vikings are another type of these type of people that come out of Norway and Sweden, Scandinavia, very, very north. Their environment is very harsh because it's ice cold up there, right? Literally the temperatures are so cold, so it's like the opposite of the desert, but it's got a similar effect of toughening them up, right? So literally in the winter, they go into hibernation, They literally have to hide in these big houses with their animals and everything. And in the summer they come out. Like there is a very, very tough environment that they came out of, the Vikings. So the Vikings, they invaded a lot of Northern Europe. There's a map showing some of the extent of their invasions. Yeah. All the colored bits are where the Vikings basically invaded and settled down. One of their main destination was Britain, but also north of France. So you might have heard of Normandy and the Normans. So Normans are descended from Vikings. So Norman is from Northmen. So they came from the north. So they originally came from here, Scandinavia, which is Norway and Sweden today. And they came in their ships and they invaded Britain, north of France, and also east into what is today Russia. Yeah. So once again, these Vikings, they had a pagan religion. So they were like, you probably know about their religion, right? Thor and Odin and worshipping all these weird things, spirits and demons and all these things. And, so once they invaded these countries, within a couple of generations, they've taken on Christianity. So they all become Christian because once again, they're going into a higher culture, a place where there's learning, developed thought and all these things. So they lose their language. They become French. They become Anglo-Saxon. They become English, French. Yeah, no one speaks Old Norse in these countries now, right? They speak French, they speak English. So once again, they lose their language, they lose their religion, they take on the higher culture within a couple of generations. Yeah. Now, and this is a really interesting thing that happens. This doesn't happen with the Arabs. Right? And this is for me one of the amazing things about the Muslim. We're calling them Arabs, but obviously the Arabs are the first Muslims, right? And as I said in Western textbook, they like to prefer to call them Arabs rather than Muslims. So the Arab Bedouins, they're united under one leader for the first time, which is the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It's similar in a way to how Genghis Khan unites the Mongolian tribes sometime later. The Mongolian is much later. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam unites the Arab tribes for the first time under one person. Right? So they become a very powerful force. But something very different happens in this case. And once again, it's a good study. I don't know if anyone's written about this, but it's a good study to be done. If you look at, compare these different Viking, there must be many other examples. In the case of the Arabs, they don't lose their language and they don't lose their religion when they invade these advanced civilizations. They take over most of the Roman Empire. They take over the entire Persian Empire. Yeah, in the initial Arab conquest under Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. They've already taken over 3/4 of the Roman Empire, and we've already taken the whole of the Persian Empire. These are advanced civilizations. But an amazing thing happens. Yeah? We retain our language, the Arabic language, and we retain our religion, Islam. We don't take on the religion and the language of the conquered people. And the reason is because obviously here we've got something different happening. These people are not coming like the Vikings and the Mongols. They're coming with the Quran, they're coming with the teaching, they're coming with the revelation. The Prophet ﷺ has already civilized them. He's already brought them a superior teaching. You understand? The Prophet ﷺ has given these Arabs a superior teaching. So what happens? The opposite happens. All of these lands that they take over, they become Arabic speaking. They convert to Islam. You go to Syria today. Syria used to be a part of a Christian Roman Empire. Yeah? Egypt used to be Christian Roman Empire. Iraq and Iran used to be Persian fire worshipper. They had a lot of Jewish and Christian communities there as well. Yeah? Now they're all Muslim and they all speak Arabic. So this is one of the amazing things when we look at history. So I'm going to skip on to my second slide deck now, inshallah. Close this one. Quickly open the next one before you see my computer games and stuff. They're my kids. Blame it on my kids before you. No, seriously, I don't play computer games anymore. The last one I played was Halo. That's a long time ago now. But I could only play solo mission because if someone like me try to play like against other people, they just shoot you down so quickly. Like young people nowadays are like jump. I'm like going right slowly. They're just jumping around, shooting you down. Anyway, so inshallah, we're gonna for the next I think it's for about 30-35 minutes. We're gonna just focus on now about the Prophet ﷺ himself, having given hopefully that sort of a picture. Now, once again, when I'm going to talk about the seerah, I'm not going to do it in the more traditional way, which you've probably been taught before, which is just telling you about his life and what happened. We will look at that very briefly, but I think it's more interesting, and plus you probably know a lot of that, more interesting to look at some of the things around it, that we often don't talk about in our madrasas and in our Muslim schools and things, which I think are really, really important and very strengthening of our iman as well. Yeah. So one of the things we really neglect as Muslims to study. Why is this counter going on here? Yes, I think one of the things we often neglect, which is so important, is the build up to the Prophet ﷺ coming to this earth. The Prophet ﷺ didn't come out of a vacuum. I think it's really important. Something we neglect a little bit, um, because the Prophet ﷺ was the final prophet. He was foretold. The people knew about him coming before he came, and he verified the teachings that went before. So the Christians and the Jews, particularly, they knew a lot of information about the Prophet ﷺ before he came. We know this because the Quran tells us this. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يعرفونه كما يعرفون أبناءهم. They know him just like they know their own sons. Yeah, they, meaning the Jews and the Christians, specifically the Jews in Medina, said يعرفونه, well, it's Ahlul Kitab, Jews and Christians. يعرفونه كما يعرفون أبناءهم. They know him just as well as they know their own sons. This is a very strong statement in the Quran, because these Jews and Christians, they knew that he's the Prophet. They had all the signs. They had all the information, a lot of information. They hid a lot of it. That's why Allah says in the Quran many times, يَكْتُمُونَ الْحَقَّ بِالْبَاطِلِ. They cover up the truth with falsehood. They mix the truth and they cover up some of the things that they know. Until today, they're doing the same thing, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, were not released and things like that. In the Vatican, they've got so much things that their leaders, they cover it up so the masses won't find out about these, because otherwise they would know that this is a true prophet. Now, why were there Jewish tribes living in Medina? There were 3 Jewish tribes in Medina, right? Bani Nadir, Bani Qaynuqa. Can't remember the third one right now. What were they doing in Medina, in Yathrib? The Jewish tribes, 3 Jewish tribes living in Yathrib. What they were doing there? They were there because they knew the final prophet will come to this city. That's why they were there. Right? They had so much information. Few of them that became Muslim, they said to the Prophet ﷺ, we didn't just have information about you, we also had detailed description of your 2 Khalifas, Abu Bakr and Umar. They knew this man is the... Why did they not accept him? Because of arrogance. Yeah, the Bani Israel, the Jews, they were waiting for the final prophet, but they assumed that he's going to be from the Jews. Remember, these people have got a long line of prophets. From Ishaq, from Yaqub, who is Israel. They had they used to have one prophet after another. When one prophet dies, another prophet. All the way down to the time of Prophet Isa alayhi salam. And then from Prophet Isa alayhi salam to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's a 600-year gap. So these people, they're very racially arrogant, really, about their own race, because they do have this very long ancient history, So arrogance is the thing that prevents one from recognizing the truth. That is the fundamental thing that prevents someone from recognizing truth, is arrogance. So when the Prophet ﷺ came suddenly, but he's from the Arab. He's an Arab, he's not a Jew. They forgot that Ibrahim alayhi had 2 sons, not just Ishaq, he's got Ismail. And the Prophet ﷺ is from Ismail. But they didn't want to accept that. Yeah? No, well, how can we follow an Arab? We're not going to follow Arab. We've been arrogating over these Arabs all this stuff. That's what prevented them, but they knew he was a prophet. You know, it's like the Mubahala, when they had the Mubahala, the incident of Mubahala that's mentioned in the Quran. When some Christians came to the Prophet ﷺ and they were just debating with him, you know, trying to say, no, no, we're right, you're wrong. In the end, Allah sent down ayah of Quran. He said, I'm just going to, I won't, I mean, just to the meaning of it. Say to these Christians, you know, if you really think you're on the truth, then let's do a deal. You bring your wives and your sons and your families, and we'll bring our wife and our sons and our families, and we'll make a dua that may the curse of Allah be upon whoever is on the or whoever is lying. They refused to do that. They were scared. They knew. They knew he's a prophet. They said, no, no, we don't. We're not gonna put your mouth where your money is, or whatever you call it. Eh? So this was the thing, you know. The Prophet ﷺ said, if they had participated, they would have choked on their own saliva and died at that point. So an interesting, this guy Bart Ehrman, he's not Muslim. He's a scholar of the Bible. Yeah, he studies the Bible. He doesn't know anything about Islam or anything like that. So in his studies of the Bible, he made a historical study. What he wanted to do, he said, I want to find out what can we know for sure is the actual word or teachings of Jesus from the Bible. Because most of the Bible, you can't be sure. It's all, you know, there's different, it's come from different places, there's no historical accuracy. So he wanted to do a specific study to find out for what can we know for sort of for objectively, so not as a Christian who believes in the Bible, but objectively as a historian, what can we know for sure that was teaching of Jesus, alayhi salam? And he came with these conclusions. He said very few things, maybe only 2 or 3 things that we can know for sure that Jesus said or taught from a study of the Bible. And it's interesting that what were they? One of them is that he said that Jesus was teaching an apocalyptic message. Apocalyptic message. What does it mean by apocalyptic message? It means that what Jesus was telling his followers is that after me there is going to come this major person. And when that person comes, then Allah is going to give him victory over the tyrannical empires of this earth. Yeah? That's what we mean by the apocalypse. You probably heard of that term, apocalypse. Christians are still waiting for it. They don't realize it already happened. The Prophet ﷺ already came, right? There's some Christians, well, to be fair, many Christians became Muslim, as we said before. They embraced Islam when the Prophet ﷺ came. The Quran describes them, you know, that when they hear the ayat of Allah, you see the tears coming down their faces when they recognize the truth. So many Christians did, but there's still some now that still talk about it. So one thing Bart Ehrman said we know for sure is that Jesus was telling his followers about this, what they call apocalypse, this kingdom of God. Yeah, if you read, I've got the quote there from Bart Ehrman. Yeah, throughout the earliest accounts of Jesus' words are found predictions of a kingdom of God that is about to appear, in which God will rule. Obviously, metaphor, I mean, through his laws and through his teaching. This will be an actual kingdom here on the earth. So not in heaven. We're not talking about the akhirah. On this earth, it will be established. Yeah. When it comes, the forces of evil will be overthrown along with everyone who was sided with them. Judgment on all others will be brought by the Son of Man. So this is in the Bible to today, the Son of Man, right? A cosmic figure that is to arrive from heaven at any moment. Arrive from heaven being sent from heaven, in other words. Being a member of Israel will not be enough to escape the coming judgment. So it won't be enough. When that final prophet comes, it won't be enough just to be from Bani Israel. Because this will be a message for the whole world. Now, the interesting thing he adds is that This is the quote from the actual Bible, yeah, about the Son of Man. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of that one will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father. Now, this is what Bart Ehrman says. He says there is no indication that Jesus is talking about himself. So this is not about the second coming of Jesus, which some Christians think, right? Jesus is talking about another prophet. And this is Bart Ehrman from an objective point of view. He's not looking at the Bible as a Christian, but as a historian. He says, on the contrary, he appears to be talking about someone else for sure. The Son of Man. So we know from the Quran, yeah? We know from the Quran that the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, this is the ayah of Quran, Prophet Isa alayhi salam gave good tidings to his followers of Ahmad. He knew the name Ahmad. He was given the name Ahmad. Yeah? The Prophet Jesus alayhi salam was given the name Ahmad. Quran tells us that. And look what Bart Ehrman is saying. This is one of the only things we can be sure that Jesus was actually teaching his followers. That's Quran 61:6, yeah? Now, I've missed out a few other we can talk about as well, but because of constriction on time, there's a mention in the Bible of the Paraclete, yeah, the Paraclete, which many Muslim scholars, including Ibn Taymiyyah and others in the past, and more modern scholars as well, believe is referring to the Prophet ﷺ, because the word Paraclete in the Bible, it means the one who intercedes, which we know is one of the name of the Prophet ﷺ. And in another reading, I think it's Paraclite or something like that. If you read it slightly differently, it actually means the praised one, which is literally Ahmad, which is we know that Jesus was going to. Anyway, but let's move on. We also know the Jews are waiting for the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah, they're in Yathrib waiting for him. Why are there so many Jews in Arabia? You know, there's so many Jewish tribes in Arabia at that time as well. This is a aspect of history that has been quite covered up. If you look at the Jewish histories themselves, I've read a few. I've read about 3. History of the Jewish people by their own professors. Their presence in Arabia is only touched upon. They don't really go into that much. But if you look at the Seerah, there's so many Jewish tribes in Arabia. Not just in Medina, but in Khaybar. There's major communities and strongholds of Jews. You know, they're not really focusing on that. Okay, the other thing is, let me know when there's 10 minutes here, please. The other thing is, so we've talked a bit about the background, yeah, leading up to Prophet ﷺ coming. So there was a great anticipation amongst the Jewish and the Christian people. I haven't got time to talk about Heraclius as well. Heraclius knew, you know, when he questioned Abu Sufyan. Probably some of you are familiar with it. When Heraclius was given that letter, he questioned Abu Sufyan, who was in the local town from the Arabs. And Abu Sufyan was not even Muslim at the time. But he had asked him certain questions that they knew are going to be signs of the final prophet. And all the answers that Abu Sufyan gave corresponded to what they knew. And Heraclius, the Roman emperor, he actually says, if you have said what is true, then he will soon own the space under my feet. Yeah, so they knew these things. Now, when the Prophet ﷺ has come, his impact upon human history is absolutely massive. Yeah. So this guy, Michael Hart, some of you may have heard of him. He is he's not a Muslim, but he was a amateur historian really. Well, people have put him down saying, oh, he's just an amateur, but probably he was a serious historian. And he decided he's going to do some research and he wants to write a book. He wants to identify the 100 most influential people in history that have ever lived. Yeah, so he went into his research and looked into different people that he thought and studied and so on. And in the end, he came up with this 100 ranking. And he put number one Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Yeah, number one, the most impactful on entire human history. So even objectively, people that can look at now. Obviously, a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of non-Muslims didn't like that. And but that's just a fact. The Prophet ﷺ has been the greatest impact of anyone on human history. He completely transformed the world that people lived in. Yeah? So we're going to look now. It's a brief sketch of the life of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And we see that he was born in 570. Yeah? Um, in 610, at the age of 40, he receives his first revelation. The Prophet ﷺ at the age of 40 receives his first revelation. This is the age of maturity of a man or a woman. His 40 is when someone gets to their full level of intellectual maturity. Yeah? Often when we're young, which I'm not anymore, but I used to be at one point, we think that we know everything. Yeah. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I thought I knew quite a lot as well. But when you get to 40s, when you realize actually you were a bit silly. Yeah. And there's no way we can, you're not going to experience that unless you hit 40. So there's no point trying to convince you of that right now. I think under age of 40, you still, you're not at that level of physiological maturity as well. So the age of 40 is the age, where the Prophet ﷺ receives first revelation. Now, before the age of 40, he was living a very simple life, obviously, in Mecca. And he never did anything of the nature that the polytheists used to do in terms of what we would call now haram. Obviously, before he's a prophet, it's not haram anyway, but he didn't indulge in drinking alcohol or having liaisons with women, things like that, because it was not in his nature. Even Abu Bakr, before he became Muslim, he never drank wine because it wasn't, even though many of the other great Sahaba did before they became Muslim. Um, the Prophet ﷺ himself and Abu Bakr didn't. And the Prophet ﷺ never worshipped idols as well, just out of his own repulsion towards that type of thing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him as well, because the Prophet ﷺ said, there was only 2 occasions I thought I might go and experience a nightlife in Mecca. Because Mecca was one of the town, obviously they had a bit of a nightlife like you have, which hopefully you guys haven't been to experience in, say, central London or anything like that. Yeah. So on 2 occasions before he became a prophet, because the Prophet ﷺ used to look after camels and sheep outside of Mecca. So he said there was 2 particular occasions I thought, let me go and see what's going on, at night in Mecca. And he said on both occasions he was going to Mecca and then sleep overwhelmed him. He became so tired all of a sudden he just went to sleep by the side of the road. And when he woke up, it was morning, so he didn't get so. Allah protected him, obviously. But apart from that, he had no inclination for those to even see those type of things anyway. So the Prophet ﷺ, as you probably know, he used to go to the cave, yeah, on Mount Hira. Sorry, the cave of Hira on Jabal al-Nur. And we don't know really what he did because there's not much in the hadith what he was doing, but obviously he was reflecting, contemplating. And he would go in Ramadan. That's every Ramadan before Islam, he would go and spend the month of Ramadan in the cave. And when he was married to Khadija alayhi salam, she used to come and deliver him some food and drink and stuff like that. And he would just stay in the cave for a whole month. And that was his habit. So we can only speculate really what he was doing but obviously the scholars speculate that he was reflecting upon creation and upon the Creator and that type of thing. So at the age of 40, he receives the first revelation we mentioned earlier. For the first 2 or 3 years in Mecca, he's just telling privately about Islam to other people around him, not publicly preaching. After 3 years, the Prophet ﷺ is given the command to make the message public. So at that point, the message then goes public. He gathers his wider clan, he gathers the whole of Quraysh, and he gives them the message of Islam. Many people reject the message of Islam, many of the leaders, because people generally tend to follow their leaders. Yeah? So the leaders in the Quran are called Al-Mala. The Quran mentions Al-Mala and Al-Mustad'afin. So in every, practically it's a repeating pattern in any society, in any culture, in any place. You always have the Mala and the Mustad'afin. You have the Mala who are the leaders of that society. And you have the Mustad'afin who are the sort of, literally from Da'af, like the weaker people. Yeah, that are the sort of followers. And generally people tend to follow the leaders. So what happens with the leaders is often quite important. We see that throughout history. If a leader, for example, becomes Muslim, all of his followers will become Muslim as well, and so on. So many of the leaders of Mecca are quite worried about Islam. Like if we take Islam, we're going to lose all the other 360 idols, and then the Arabs might stop coming to Mecca. Mecca was a center. It was the and the Quraysh were the most powerful tribe in all of Arabia. So they were sort of regarded as, they're called Sadatul Arab. The Quraysh were called Sadatul Arab. They're like the chiefs of the Arab tribes. They're almost like the highest tribe, but you don't really have that, but in some way, they were respected, and the fact that they had the Kaaba was a great point of respect for them as well. So anyway, then obviously the Prophet ﷺ is in Mecca for 13 years altogether. And after 3 years of public preaching, slowly people are becoming Muslim, but many people in Mecca obviously are fighting him, and they start oppressing the Muslims, to the point where you have the Hijrah. Yeah? 615 first, we have the first Hijrah to Abyssinia. So before the Hijrah to Yathrib, the first Hijrah is to Abyssinia, which is in Africa. If you remember the map, from Arabia to Africa is just crossing the Red Sea, which is quite a small crossing. Yeah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says to his followers, you can go to Abyssinia because of all the persecution we're facing in Mecca. Now Abyssinia is ruled at that time by a Christian king, the Najashi. But the Prophet ﷺ said that he's a just king. He's a just king, and people are not wronged in his land. So many of the Muslims from Mecca, they go to Abyssinia, including Uthman and others from the family of the Prophet ﷺ. They said, no, Uthman, he's actually from a very powerful clan. He doesn't probably need to, but he wants to, do the hijrah for the sake of Allah. But a lot of the others, they had to go because of the persecution. Remember, this is tribal society, so if you belong to a powerful clan or a powerful tribe, you're relatively protected, even if you're becoming Muslim. Yeah, this is why the Prophet ﷺ himself is protected for the first 10 years in Mecca, because of Abu Talib, his uncle. Yeah, Abu Talib is one of the great chief of Quraysh, highly respected, and the clan of Banu Hashim is a powerful clan. Even though they're not, at that time, they're not one of the most wealthiest clan, but they're still a powerful and respected clan of Quraysh, the Banu Hashim. And So the Prophet ﷺ, no one, they can't touch him because of the tribal code. They know that if they harm the Prophet ﷺ, the Banu Hashim are going to get revenge, even though a lot of them are still not Muslim because of the tribal code, right? But some of the other Muslims that are becoming, some of them are ex-slaves, some of them are from like small clan, weaker clans. They're getting a lot of persecution in Mecca, so they make the hijrah to Abyssinia. Now, I'm sure you know the story of how the Quraysh try to get them back, but the Najashi, he sticks by them, and they remain in Abyssinia for a long time until the other Muslims go to Yathrib, then they come to Medina eventually. Apparently, there's still an old masjid there, in one of the first masjid that was built, which is actually then the first masjid in Islam before Medina, that they built there in Abyssinia. Um, so that place is still known from legend. But the interesting thing was, the Najashi, he didn't become Muslim as far as we know. But the Prophet ﷺ did janaza salah for him when he died. When he died, the Prophet ﷺ was given news by Jibreel alayhi salam. So the Prophet ﷺ knew in Medina when he had died, even though there was no time for the news to reach them. And he actually did salah, janaza for him. Is that right, Sheikh Saleh? I'm pretty sure that's definitely true. Yeah. And so it's interesting, because obviously nowadays we often live in quite a polarized, where you get some Muslims like, oh, all non-Muslims are kuffar and we hate them and we should fight them and kill them and everything. But the Prophet ﷺ had respect for certain, even there were non-Muslims. It's very clear from the seerah. And actually the Quran tells us this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, because there are many ayahs talking about fighting against disbelievers and fighting the mushrikeen, but these are the disbelievers that are fighting you and oppressing you. The Quran makes that quite clear if you read all Quran, not just parts of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah does not forbid you from those who have not shown enmity to you, that you may be kind towards them. Yeah? So in other words, only those who have shown enmity to you, Muslims, that's the ones we're commanded to be firm against. But if there are non-Muslims, and there are non-Muslims, like I was mentioning about Robert Fisk and these other people, they actually, even go out of their way to help Muslim communities or whatever, then, we should show them compassion and mercy like we do, like the Quran tells us. It's not forbidden. So, anyway, so then, obviously, the Prophet ﷺ does the hijrah to Yathrib. Eventually, when he goes to Yathrib, most of the Arabs in Yathrib have converted to Islam. And there's a contingent of them which they're not very keen on Islam, but because everyone's now become Muslim, they say they're Muslim. So these are the munafiqun, yeah, the hypocrites. In Mecca, you don't have hypocrites, because in Mecca, there's no advantage to being Muslim. It's all persecution, persecution, persecution. But in Yathrib now, the Prophet ﷺ is declared the leader of the whole of Yathrib. Even the Jewish tribes that live there are sort of under his overall, the treaty that they signed. So now you get hypocrites, people who are just pretending, they're going along with the flow, pretending to be Muslim, but inside they don't really believe in Islam. So this is why you have this new dynamic in Medina. And then obviously in Medina, the Prophet ﷺ then has a series of battles against the Quraysh, because the Quraysh are not happy, that half the people of Mecca have gone off to Yathrib. They're going to be a threat to us in the north for our trade. So you have a series of battles which are well known. Yeah, Battle of Badr, Uhud. the Khandaq, and overall the Muslims are successful. Yeah, the Uhud is obviously a setback, and there's quite a lot of ayahs in the Quran devoted to what happened at Uhud. If you read the latter half of Surah Al Imran, a lot of that is to do with the Battle of Uhud. So there were a lot of lessons to be learnt from the Battle of Uhud, which is why the Quran has devoted all of that space and time. Because, I mean, to put it simply, if the Muslims are always having victory, there's no test. Yeah, there's no test, and the Quran says uh, that Allah wanted to test to see who are the true believers and who are the hypocrites in this situation. Because when things get tough, that's when the true iman comes to the forward. Yeah, when things get tough, that's when iman shows and hypocrites show up. If things are always victory, 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 we can never see. So Allah wants to manifest. Of course, Allah knows bidati sadur, He alimun bidati sadur, but He wants to manifest that. Because a human being is a stubborn creature. Even though Allah knows what's in our hearts, on the day of judgment, the human being will say, "No, no, Allah, no, I really had iman." Yeah, even though Allah knows he didn't, but he'll say, "No, no, Allah, I did, I did." So Allah manifests these things in this world. So you can't bring any excuses. You can't claim you had something because it's already been exposed. Yeah, so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us strong in times of hardships. And then obviously after those battles you have Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and finally you have the conquest of Mecca, and then by the time the Prophet's life comes to an end, all of the Arab tribes have united under him. You have a beautiful year of delegation. They call it the Amal Wafud, the year of delegations. Towards the end of his life, the Prophet ﷺ has delegations coming from all over Arabia. Every tribe in Arabia sends a delegation to Medina to give their bay'ah, their pledge of allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ. So this is probably the first time historically that the Arabs have been united under one leader as well. And the Quran is revealed. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح. When the victory of Allah comes and the opening, ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا. You see people coming to the deen of Allah in massive numbers. This is when, this year, all of the Arabs. And when the surah is revealed, the Muslims are rejoicing, but Sayyidina Abu Bakr is weeping. Sayyidina Abu Bakr is weeping. They said to him, "Why are you weeping? Yeah?" He's so happy. He said, "Because it means that the Prophet ﷺ will no longer be with us much longer. Because now his mission is complete." And so that's when we have, obviously, the at the age of 63, the passing away of the Prophet ﷺ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and give us all understanding. Give us the barakah of Ramadan and the blessings, and accept our fasting and our ibadat. Jazallahu anna Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mahu ahlu. Jazallahu anna Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mahu ahlu. Jazallahu anna Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mahu ahlu. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. I'm happy to take any questions about that. I don't know what you want to do, Sheikh Saleh, but or we can leave it till tomorrow if people have questions.
What topic is it for tomorrow?
So inshallah we'll be moving on tomorrow to the Khulafa Rashidun period. Yeah. And we'll obviously this is an overview, so we'll do that for maybe 1 or 2 days. And then we'll go into the Umayyad, Abbasid, and we'll cover the whole thing inshallah. Yeah. Inshallah. Yeah. Any questions? Should we take questions, or do you want to? People probably want to go back to sleep or something.
What's your take on Saudi Arabia at the moment in terms of it appears it is becoming a lot more westernized? Do you feel that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
case?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously with Mohammed bin Salman recently, it's quite recent, isn't it? Last maybe 5, 10 years. Yeah, 5 years even. There's been a big move to. It's specifically all done by him,
Because
you know.
there's a lot more concerts taking place, a lot of
Yeah.
like you see these fights taking place, which is not the case that used to be.
Yeah, so it's literally last maybe 5 years, isn't it? 5 or 6 years. Yeah, he's opened it up. I mean, he's obviously he wants to make it like a sort of another United Arab Emirates, and um, he also wants to move away from the whole Wahhabi thing because so the Saudis came on basically after 9/11. The Saudis came under a lot of negative scrutiny from the West because most of the people flying the plane were Saudis, weren't they? So then the whole Wahhabi thing became an issue. A lot of Western academics were writing about Wahhabis and how this ideology is what leading to all these terrorism and everything. So I mean, the Saudi kingdom has been very closely allied to the Wahhabi teachings and the Wahhabi movement since its beginning. And in fact, it goes back centuries, and inshallah, we are going to cover some of that later on. Um, so he's now very belatedly trying to divorce it. Like he famously said, "There's no such thing as Wahhabi. What's a Wahhabis?" But Wahhabism is a term that is used throughout Western and Islamic literature and academia. So it's a very well recognized, but he's sort of trying to deny it, and he's trying to sort of distance himself from that. I don't know how Sheikh Saleh probably knows a lot more than me because I don't really keep that much track of these sort of Salafi and Wahhabi scholars and things. But I think I heard they were putting some of them in jail, and are they removing them from the universities as well, or like Medina University and things? I don't know what's going on, but um, yes, that's basically what he's trying to do. He's trying to become more. I think partly it's economic. I mean, I think they realize that oil is going to run out at some point, so they need to have other income revenues. So they're probably thinking ahead in that sense. They want to get some tourism,
But you reckon
tourism
the
and
whole
this and that.
Islamic principle is maybe going to be lost in the process? Do you reckon?
I mean, it's not nice, isn't it? I mean, even though when we used to go to there, even though it was such a strict Wahhabi thing, in a way you feel happy because these are the holy cities, and you feel it's nice for it to be more on the strict side than to be more on the liberal, free side. So, what do we prefer? I'd prefer it to be what it was like the old days. But then again, maybe we're being hypocrites because we go to cinemas and we have these things going on, and but we want the Saudis to never have a cinema. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's as long as you don't transgress the boundaries of Allah. Let's not do anything haram. Now I think they're trying to bring in alcohol. That's probably going a bit too far, isn't it? I mean, but the key thing is let's not transgress the boundaries or hudud of Allah. That's all I can say really. I mean, Islam is not against some entertainment. I mean, Muslims are not really supposed to be that strict. I mean, that's my understanding. The Prophet ﷺ allowed Aisha to see the dancing of the people in the Abyssinians dancing. He even allowed her to listen to singing of slave girls. And even Abu Bakr came in and he said, "What, you got these singing girls?" I think they had instrument. It was not very clear in the hadith, but they were definitely singing. But Abu Bakr came in, "What, these instrument of shaitan in the house of the Prophet ﷺ?" And the Prophet ﷺ said to Abu Bakr, "Calm down. Let them enjoy, let people have a bit of entertainment and enjoyment. It's not something haram in Islam. So we should be strict upon ourselves, but not strict upon others. That's the principle in Islam. Be strict as much as you want upon yourself, and inshallah you'll come more closer to Allah. But amongst the Muslims, make the deen easy for them. The Prophet ﷺ was always making deen easy for people. He never wanted to make the deen a burden on people. So it's like when the first time when the Taliban first went into power in Afghanistan back long time, 2004 I think it was. And they were smashing all the TVs and everything. No one's allowed to watch TV, closed down all the cinemas. I remember this. I think Sheikh Saleh might have been there. We were in a course with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf at that time, and I mentioned this to Sheikh Hamza. I heard, because Sheikh Hamza was also talking a lot about against TV, bad effects of TV. So I mentioned to him, "Oh, yeah, have you heard about the Taliban smashing all the TVs?" And he was saying, "Yeah, good, good." But it was interesting. I saw an interview with one of the Taliban spokespeople, and they said to him, "Look, he's smashing all the TVs, closed all cinemas. What are people supposed to do to enjoy themselves?" And he said, "They can go to the park and look at the beautiful flowers." Alhamdulillah. That's the sort of thing, I mean, We have to, as long as we don't do what is haram. We have to have boundaries, the hudud of Allah. But then we can enjoy ourselves in a halal ways, like going to park.
So here in the start, you mentioned there are patterns which Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is a sunnah of Allah which is implemented over and over again in history. Are we going to cover that within the next, or is it
Inshallah,
something
yes.
that you can tell us about?
The sunnahs of Allah are things like, for example, if a people, this is one of the great things we can study in the Quran. It's an amazing, when you read the Quran, um, you can see a lot of these laws are there. I mean, one of the simple one is like, obviously, if people reject the message, the messengers come, people reject the message, those people are punished. That's a simple one. But there's actually a lot more interesting things in the Quran. Like, for example, um, if people are given lots of blessings, like lots of wealth, lots of blessings, what does that mean? You know, does that mean they're on the right path? That's what you naturally would instinctively think, right? That if people are given wealth and abundance and blessings, that they're probably following the right path. But the Quran actually gives you different different scenarios. One is that if people accept the message and follow the Prophet, then Allah will open to them a lot of bounties and blessings. But also in the Quran talks about those people who reject the message. Sometimes they are given a lot of these wealth, but it's a precursor to them being punished. So it's really interesting how that works as well. So you can't really tell, if you see a sort of people like if people when people look at the West now, they think, no, there's so much wealth, there's so much abundance, they must be doing something right. No, they could be doing something very wrong, and it's because Allah's decided now to punish them. Allah says then He opens to them all of the worldly blessings, because they're just going to go more and more astray now, and then they're going to be destroyed. So sometimes people can be put through hardship to bring them guidance. So there's all of these are sunan.
That was the second part of my question. That because of that sunnah, the repetition in history, is that something which you foresee coming in the near or future in the world as general?
Well, yes, definitely, because you can't have any change to the sunnah of Allah. But also the other thing is, in terms of what's going to happen now, we've been given a lot of information from the Prophet ﷺ about things that will happen from his time to the Day of Judgment. But that's a whole different subject. The Akhir al-Zaman. We have got a lot of knowledge about those things.